morning, interwebs. Folks, my name is Jeff DeVerter here for another great episode of Cloud Talk Live. All right, well, welcome back. Happy Tuesday. It's a sunny day in San Antonio. You know, who doesn't love that? And so glad that you're here with us today. Hey guys, the rules are the same. I'd love for you to introduce yourself. Use that comments. I don't know if you're on LinkedIn. I don't know if you're on YouTube, but I would love for you to introduce yourself. Tell us who you are. Tell us where you are. That's right. I've been bragging to the guests about how global this audience is, and the best way to prove that, of course, is for you to introduce yourself and tell us where you are. So you want to get a hold of us also, you can send an email over to solve@rackspace.com. Now, folks, I have been back hard at producing new podcast episodes for us. So if you are not already subscribed to the, there we go. If you're not already subscribed to the Cloud Talk podcast, I'd love for you to do that. You can do that by going anywhere those pesky podcasts are found. So just head on over to, it might be Google Play, it might be the Apple Store, it might be my favorite, which is Outcast, and that's where I find that. All right, we've got Pakistan here. We have got India here. Welcome, gentlemen. I'm glad that you are both here. Costa Rica has made it. Professor Carlos, back from Costa Rica. How is the weather down in Costa Rica today? You know, I've threatened my wife about a nice trip down to Costa Rica. I'm sure you would recommend some great beaches to go see. All right, James is here from Texas. Hey, a fellow wrecker, I'm glad that you're here. And Lauro is here, glad that you're here. Monterrey, Mexico. I love Monterrey, Mexico. I've been there a couple of times. Tampa is here. Dallas is here. UAE is here. All right, you've just proven the global audience, but keep the introductions coming. So, hey, go check out the podcast today. In fact, producer Daniel, I've uploaded the latest podcast, so we will put it out into the feed today. And that is an incredible interview with a couple of leaders here at Rackspace, Josh Pruitt and Travis Runty. Josh leads all of our, he was our chief product officer. Now he has actually gotten into helping lead folks who are helping in our sales engineering teams. So great leader there. You may have noticed in the feed, it's a lot of Rackspace executives. Folks, there is a lot of change that's happening here. And in this edition, this episode that comes out this week, I get a chance to talk about leadership and how some folks, Travis and Josh, started at some very low positions inside of this company and over a number of years have risen to nearly the top. And it's an interesting story. I hope you'll check it out. And coming up in the next one is our president of private cloud, which is a guy named Brian Lilly. A fascinating interview, one of the longest that we've done. So you're going to want to buckle up for that. Maybe listen in double time. But there's some great things there. All right, a couple of other shout outs here to some of the folks who have shown up. And who else here? So we got Florida is here. Hyderabad, India is here. Vietnam is here. Egypt, welcome. So glad that you are there as well. Let's go ahead and cut that out so we can see all the great pop-ups. Sorry about that, Daniel. And all right. Well, if you were paying attention to the feed of our episode for today, then you'll know that it has to do with all things generative AI. In fact, you can expect a whole lot more content coming from Rackspace here in the Solve program around all things AI. Now, very specifically, we're going to get into having a conversation around predictive analytics and how generative AI, it's hard to say. Ooh, welcome South Africa. Always love it when South Africa shows up. How generative AI is impacting the whole world of predictive analytics. And so I've got a couple of guests who are going to come talk about that stuff. But let's just get some background on what generative AI is. And to do that, we have to have a conversation around, well, what is AI? So artificial intelligence really comes in a family or a suite of other capabilities. It starts with artificial intelligence. And that is really around the whole concept of how do we manually program in the capabilities? Think of it through a series of if-thens types of statements that would drive towards an outcome. Now that is a subset of that then becomes machine learning. Machine learning is where the machines themselves are testing capabilities. They're testing situations and they're effectively learning on their own. And then you get into deep learning, and deep learning is where you're now just not taking a set known group of conditions, like let's take some images coming in and let's identify one specific type of an element in there. Let's identify circles, let's identify squares, let's identify great cups that have great tea or coffee in them. But then you get into deep learning, and deep learning is where you're now starting to layer that. Think of the brain, think of the neurons in the brain that interact with one another through a series of conditions to then filter down or get to greater levels of granularity or prediction. And that gets us to generative AI. Now, generative AI, then we combine all of that together where we're now able to, and when we speak about generative, we are creating something. In this case, let's use ChatGPT, for instance, where ChatGPT is a generative text-based environment. So now, really, all it's doing is figuring out what is the next word that should show up in that sentence or thought. But it's doing it, of course, and then connecting those sentences, those words into phrases, those phrases into sentences, those sentences into cohesive thoughts. And so now, when we take all of that and we think about it in the context of other aspects, like where we get into talking about it in the context of analytics, well, then that is a very specific use case. And we see these use cases used all over the place. We see it being created in images, in voice, in text, in everything. And it's impacting every aspect of our world. And so let's bring Ben Blanquera up. Ben is a Racker. Ben's been on the program a few times before, works inside of the office of the CTO here at Rackspace, and has been spending an inordinate amount of time thinking about all things data. And that's where it all starts, isn't it, Ben?
Absolutely, Jeff. Without data, you don't have AI, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all about how these patterns are learned and recognized, just like humans, right? We see the same things over and over again. We see patterns and we draw conclusions from that. But without data, you got nothing.
Ben, great way to bring it down. If we don't see patterns, we don't create those patterns in the data, then we don't have anything to draw on. And I wanted to start with just a quick chat about you because I want to double down on our conversation and the thoughts specifically just about data, because that is where all of this comes from. It comes from it. We'll start with just two primary areas. First is I talked earlier about how we take these models, which is literally just that. It's a set of conditions that we think is going to drive an outcome, and we train them with data. So the model is useless if we don't train that, and we only can train it against a known set of data. So the quality, let's talk about what qualities make great data, Ben, for just a second, to use in training or in other areas.
Sure. When there's different types of sort of quality. First, there's the quality associated with the how you label fields. So when we say a house, and you have a data field that says a house, what is a house? And how is it an apartment? Is it a domicile on a ship? So having data dictionary that define what is this type of data element and having consistency associated with that. Then there's data that is, do you have data that is biased? When you're looking at a population of folks, do you understand the bias of the data? Then there is sort of cleanliness of the data, which is, once again, when we say what is a customer, that it is customer records, then there is data that is out of date. Is data out of date?
Yeah, so timeliness of data really plays in.
Yeah, so there's a whole field around data governance, data quality, and data cleanliness.
Yeah.
But having a set of consistent data that allows you to draw logical conclusions is pretty fundamental.
And Ben,
I think it's typically a missing piece.
Yeah, and typically a missing piece, and it's missing because I would say it's generally overlooked, because even though it's only June, and even though ChatGPT has been part of the global vernacular for only 5 or 6 months, they've been working on it a lot longer, but we've really came into its own in that amount of time. It has created this myth that you can, hey, I want me some ChatGPT. I'd like to point it at my sales data, maybe, so I could ask as an executive questions of my data, of my business. and think, hey, magically, I should be able to just get that stuff. But a lot of executives and folks inside of the organization don't realize that that data has to be clean, and they don't really realize the quality of the data that or lack thereof that exists in their organization. And I thought we might talk just for a second as to why that is. And I think a lot of it, Ben, goes to it goes to why we have guests like when we bring Brian up here in a second, who makes his living in his industry in and around analytics. Because traditionally, Ben, we have had, I'm going to make visual representations. We've had the data down here. We've had sandwiched in the middle all the analytics people. And then up in the above, we have the executives and the business decision makers who want to do something with the data. And I think the quality of the data has been obscured by our analytics people who have managed that relationship with the data and then produce outputs. But now we want to put a machine in the middle and figure that piece out. Now, before we talk about that anymore, everybody who's listening to this and watching, is your company using AI today? If so, maybe how? Don't give it away any state secrets, but I'd love for you to comment. And we want to bring that into the chat here shortly. But if you don't comment, we can't bring it into the chat. So how are you guys using in your organizations artificial intelligence, machine learning today? All right, Ben, back to you. Let's talk about how what needs to be done. We're going to talk here in a second about that shielding of the analytics folks and how we're breaking that down. But let's talk about what types of things. You've already alluded to it. You've talked about, hey, let's talk about a house, or at this point, a contract. Well, what is a contract? What is a customer? We have to define those things. But how are some ways that companies can get an understanding of the data that they have, and then two, start cleaning that data up to where it can be useful?
Sure, that's a great. So, from a basic sort of fundamental perspective, one, I think organizations need to understand that without good data, you're not going to be able to do good analytics or good AI. So the starting point is having a structure, a governance around who owns data, how is it managed, how is it defined. That's a starting point, is having a governance structure around data.
Yeah.
Then once you have the governance, then it's an understanding of what in your business, what's the data that matters for your business.
Yeah, what matters?
What matters? What is the data that matters for your organization? And then within your governance and structure, then you start blowing out that data and start figure out which of these things, how you want to govern it, how you want to manage it, what metadata do you want to have. So there's a whole field in science right now, but it starts with understanding it's important. Here's someone or a group that's in charge of it. Data owners. When someone says who owns this data, and then putting in the technical sort of tools to make that happen, and then having a way to then monitor and measure the data quality over time.
Yeah, I've worked in and around data for decades, and when you're in larger organizations, there are people who are responsible for that classification of data, and usually it's in the construct of compliance in some sort of an industry. In other words, how long do I have to keep this data? Not necessarily how clean is it, but how long do I have to keep it? What type of storage? How quickly do I have to have it back? It's these sorts of conversations. But now we're trying to take all that data and turn it into this rich soil that new aspects of our business can grow out of.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned before, we have this layer of business analytics people, of the reporters on that data. And they're the ones who are trying to create great quality reports and outputs so that business leaders can make smart decisions. And so they're the ones who have been working with the data team to work on the quality. Now it's an everybody conversation. And one gentleman who's been working in and around that space for a good long while is Brian Sampsel. Now, Brian is the Vice President of Analytics and Strategy. Brian, why don't you come on up onto the stage here? And of course, I say that like you have some sort of control in that. So
I'm at your mercy.
I know. You stand there quietly going, I'd like to come and talk now. Thank you very much. Well, Brian, thanks for taking time to be a part of the program. You were hot off vacation and thrown right into a live stream. So thank you so much for being here.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So Brian, let's go in the Wayback Machine, like maybe a whole year. and talk about what life was like in the analytics space. Taking AI and this whole generative thing off the table for a second. Actually, first, introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and what you do and the company that you work with.
Sure. My background's data and analytics. It's funny. I started before analytics was really a thing. So, my degree is actually statistics, but kind of found my way in this analytics field as it was maturing. Been on the, leading internal analytics teams, been on the consulting side. And for about the past year, I've been at the International Institute of Analytics, where we offer advisory services to data and analytics leaders. Just really trying to come alongside them and help them succeed.
I love it. Taking it to a whole new level. Now, from the way you explained it to me, which made a whole lot of sense, is you're sort of the Gartner, but very specific to this area. You're not folks who are actually doing the work. You're helping to guide people who are getting this sort of thing done.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We, the job of a data and analytics leader is hard.
Yeah.
Right. If you think of, keeping up with the technology, trying to hire has always been a challenge because it's a super competitive field. It's changing fast. Not only do you have to know your field of data and analytics, you got to know the business really well to be successful, right? So you got to be an expert in both, and you've got to be somebody that can bring all these different sides together and actually enact change in a big organization. That's a hard job. I think it sounds like a fun job. It's hard. So we're trying to help them.
Yeah. Awesome. Fantastic. All right. Well, let's get back into that Wayback Machine conversation. What did this look like before, generative AI was on everybody's lips?
Yeah. It's interesting. You and Ben were talking about data earlier, right? Data has always been, I don't say a problem, but a challenge, right?
It's the Achilles heel of a quality, bit of reporting.
Yeah. I mean, going back from, decades ago to even last year, it's always been a challenge, right? Like you said, are we defining things the right way? Do we have access to it? Are we able to combine it quickly? It's always been the challenge, right? And it's often frustrating to, those young in their career, right? Because you go into analytics thinking, I'm going to build these awesome models and create these cool visualizations. And you get in the job and you're like, oh man, so much of the job is just pulling data together, right? And
it's just cleaning the data up and making it usable. Yeah, you get all excited. You say, somebody says, how long is it going to take you to create that? It's going to take me, I'll crank it out in 3 days. It'll be perfect. And then you look at the data. Oh, it's going to be 3 weeks.
Exactly. We've actually done some research over the last year or so, and we're seeing a big shift in the mentality of chief data officers, right? Where and there's even some books and articles that talk about kind of the first generation CDO versus second generation, where again, that first generation was really just like you were saying, compliance focused, building
it together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the second generation is much more analytics focused, much more offensively focused, right? As opposed to just defense, right? It's more, what we're seeing is CDOs that are just defensively focused, right? Just solely focused on that data quality and that, they've got a short tenure, right? And so those ones that are successful are embracing, hey, how do I use this offensively, right? Whether that's predictive analytics, generative, whatever, right?
Yeah, that's super interesting. So now we get into today, where we have this world where everybody now is thinking, the whole generative text thing and we just go back to using ChatGPT as that blanket statement, the thing that everybody's familiar with. How is it specifically impacting the world of predictive analytics? Actually, you should probably define. Everyone knows analytics, but tell me about predictive analytics first.
Yeah. And maybe I'll back up a little bit, right? There's, you can find this visual all over the internet, right? People talk about descriptive or diagnostic versus predictive and prescriptive, right? I like to think of it maybe in 3 buckets. One is what has happened, right? That'd be your descriptive kind of stuff. What has happened in the past? Predictive, right? What might happen in the future, right? I'm going to make a prediction about my sales a year from now based on what I know today, right? And then the third bucket is, can you do something for me, right? Can you automatically place an order, right? Like, can we, if you in a grocery store, right? If we think, based on our model, we might be out of stock of a product, right? Can you automatically place that order?
Everyone's buying cupcake mix because there's a run on birthday party. So you see the thing happening. Yeah. Can you take an action on getting more cupcakes?
Exactly. Just go ahead and place that order for me, right? Just make it happen, right? So that's kind of how I think about it, right? And I think, obviously, analytics, the data analytics department is not immune to getting disrupted by this whole generative AI thing, right? And I think it's interesting, right? Because the data and analytics department has historically been a disruptor, right? We are going in and changing other people's processes and making, helping other people make decisions differently. And this is a bit of a disruptor for us, right? So
I often like to think of you guys as the truth tellers, because you got everybody in the business and they're all walking around with their gut, and their gut is generally pretty accurate because they live in the business every day. Yeah. You guys are the truth tellers going in, because the numbers, well, I always say numbers don't lie, just the data scientists, but it's all in how you use it. Yeah. So Ben, you've been doing a lot of, well, first of all, you're deep in this space. I mean, you do a ton with there's the whole magazine that you've been doing a lot of interviews for. Mm-hmm. Why don't you tell us really quickly about your efforts over there?
Yeah. So I've been lucky enough to, I'm an editor for CDO magazine. And so as part of that work, we have a series around CDO field guide to creating value. And so what I've been able to do is I interview CDOs from all over the globe, and it's cdomagazine.tech, because you can go check it out. And we get into very specific in the field, what very specific techniques are you doing to create value? And so what I love about it is the ability to talk to world leaders, but then we boil it down to 3 very practical tips that CDOs or CDOs organizations can action on. And so that we've been doing that for about 6 months now, and it's coming out great.
Well, and I love the phrase that you're using, how do you create value? And because as technologists, we've all been in this industry longer than we care to admit. And as a technologist, we get excited about the technology and sometimes feels like a solution running around looking for a problem. But now we're in a scenario where we have data that isn't just something we have to classify and store to stay out of trouble, but we have data that can create value for organizations. And that's really where it comes down to. So there's a lot of questions I've seen as I watch things go by. How is AI going to impact my day-to-day for it? How people are using it in schools. They're using it all over the place. But let's talk very specifically now when we think about predictive analytics. We think about, hey, we want to, based on a trend that we're seeing, we want to take some action. How does generative, I really have trouble saying that word, AI fit into that? I want to give you each a chance to answer that. So Ben, maybe we'll lean on you. How are you seeing, and especially as you have your conversations with other CDOs around the world, because it is a global thing, how are you seeing generative AI creating value?
Yeah, so there's a couple of sort of broad use cases. There is the use case that says there's a lot of knowledge and I need to be able to query it and it gets summarized in a certain way, right? So this is the auto assist. So in many cases, this is the individual auto assist model. I'm looking for this, right? Then there is that same sort of use case, because ultimately it's about synthesizing a lot of data and generating new content. That's what it's about, right? That at the broadest. Then there's the use case that says, how do I make that easier for customers? So when there's customer data, there's I need to find out where my thing is. They can ask it in natural query language, in sort of standard ways. Then there's the then there's the I need to write new things.
Yeah.
Right. There'd be assist associated with I need a starting point to draft something. Here's a question, and this whole notion of Cliff Notes just went up 100x because you have the Cliff Notes of the world that you can then augment and add to that. So what's happening is, I think the simplest sort of basic premise is, where is there a lot of data someone needs to access?
Yeah. That's right. And access, I love how you talk about, the summarization, the breaking it down into ways that are easier to see. So Brian, I'm going to come over to you now. So in your organization, again, you're not folks who are necessarily doing all the work, but you're guiding those that are as a consultancy. So let's talk about how generative AI is helping to create value in the folks that you're chatting with.
Yeah. If I think of, data and analytics teams, right? First thing comes to mind is writing code. Right. I mean, it's amazing for, I was playing around with it yesterday. It wrote me some Python code very, very quickly. Right. And, and I asked it too. I was like, hey, can you write the same thing, but in R? Right. I don't know. Those are the two primary languages in data science. Right. And it did it. Right. And it brought in the right libraries, so that's kind of where I think most people are starting is code generation, as well
helping the individual do their job better.
Yeah, and at least it gives you a start, right? Rather than me starting with a blank page or copying code from this program over here and bringing it here, like it's a great starting point, right? One of the things I'm most excited about is using it to generate synthetic data, right? So we're seeing a lot more interest over the last year-ish or so in synthetic data, right? Because we talk about it, right? Sometimes data is hard to get. It may be better, depending on your use case, just create your own, right? And man, it's generative AI is an amazing tool to do that, right? I was playing around with it yesterday, and I said, hey, give me a synthetic data set for the U.S. gross domestic product over the last couple of years, and one query, it gave me a table of it. The next query, it gave me Python code to generate my own. And, I could start playing around with it and saying, hey, because I think it gave me like the last 20 years initially. I was like, hey, give it to me for 50 years. Right. Or, and it did it, and I think, that's kind of a silly example maybe, but like,
I think it's an excellent example because in fact, you took us a bit on a journey. First, it was how can the individual do the one thing they're trying to do better, and then how can they be better at large by again, we talked about it a whole lot, and that is getting back to the core of the data. So we're coming up on just a couple of minutes out from the top of the hour. But Brian, what's the cautionary tale here? How do we need to be careful? Generating our own data that isn't clean, but it's hard.
Totally. I mean, we still have the same problem of we got to have really good, high quality data that we trust to feed into it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's the same problem we've had. It still exists. I think we'll see some developments in the future around generative AI helping us clean that data and do some of that. But, we still got to curate that right data and make it available. And I think it's going to be even more important, if we look at, because I was looking at some of the stuff, Microsoft is coming out with for Office 365, right? You're going to be able to write natural language queries, hey, give me trend of sales for the last 24 months, and it's going to do it, right? And we as data and analytics people, we got to make sure it's pointed to the right source, right? And that we trust it.
Yeah. Hey, Ben, in 30 seconds, what's your cautionary tale?
Data provenance. It goes back to understanding where your data is from, because 99% of people who are going to use the interface won't question where the data is. So now, the folks who are creating the interfaces need to now figure out how to foolproof it. So folks, we don't create bias. We don't create unintended consequences with people saying that is the reference source for truth. And it's only as good as the data that it's been set up. So data provenance and knowing where it's from, making sure it's good is a key thing.
That's excellent. All right, Ben, Brian, thank you so much for being a part of the program today. We are coming up on the top of the hour. I will just call out a question that Rajesh asked, and he said, how can we integrate these new AI into our work life in the most effective way? A subject for another time. It's a great question. We are about to start a series, a weekly series, bi-weekly series, on all things AI, and that is going to be one of the areas where we will talk about how do we integrate it in an effective, safe way. So you're going to want to make sure you're following well, follow me on the LinkedIn. Follow Rackspace on the LinkedIn if you're not already. Guys, if you want to learn more about Brian or Ben, you can find them both over on LinkedIn. You can also find Brian's TED Talk over there. It's an excellent one. I watched it as well. You want to go check that out. So everyone, thanks so much for being a part of this today. And Brian and Ben, thank you so much. All right. Just to let you know what's coming up in the next week or so, folks, I want to encourage you to head over. If you have any other thoughts or questions, head on over to rackspace.com/solve to learn more. You can find the podcast over there. You can download the podcast as well in all of those different locations. Now, next week, we have Kelly Butler, who is going to be on the program. Kelly is the Chief Diversity Officer here at Rackspace Technology. You know that through the spring, we've been bringing all sorts of different, what we call Racker resource groups, or you might know them as employee resource groups on. We all know that June is Pride Month, and we've got some folks from our Pride team who's going to be on as well. So I would encourage you to double back around here next Tuesday morning at 8:30 Central Time. Same time as always. Everyone, if you want to get a hold of us in the meantime, solve@rackspace.com. Send me a message over on Twitter or over on LinkedIn. I'd love to chat with you there as well. And with that, I think we are... That's right, at the end of another episode. Folks, we will see you next Tuesday at 8:30 a.m. Central Time. Until then, have a great week.